I told him not to read it.
Oh, boy. There's one in every group, right? I have a couple last thoughts about church growth. And this morning, this will conclude the specific series on church growth, although every Sunday, actually, is about church growth. But specifically this topic. God is the one that has given us everything, including the abilities that each of us possess. He also gives us time and wisdom to use correctly. In James 1:17, he says, every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. As we conclude the series, I want us to ask ourselves, what is our responsibility to what God has given to us? You know, in the parable of the talents that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, we saw where the master gave some money to his servants. And he expected those servants to do something worthwhile with that money, to produce results. So they were responsible for what they were given. We didn't specifically talk about that. We talked about what they did with it. But the parable implies a sense of responsibility to use what God has given to us. In Matthew 25 and verse 29, Jesus says, for to everyone who has, more shall be given. And he who hath an abundance, but from that one who does not have, even what he does shall be taken. When we think about gifts and what we have been given and the responsibility that we have for what we have been given, I want you to think for a minute. When you give somebody something, some type of gift, for instance, a child, you may have worked hard to get the money to buy that gift, or you may have actually made it yourself. But the point being is when you give that gift, you're giving it because of your love, because of something that you want to do. Now, when you give that gift, for instance, let's say it's a bicycle or a new ball glove, and you give it to the child, now you're entrusting that care or that gift to them. How does it make you feel when you look outside and you see that brand new shiny bike sitting out in the rain? Or that ball glove that you just purchased sitting out in the rain to rot? How does it make you feel if you give the child a new laptop or a new iPad or a new phone, and they think nothing of abusing it or throwing it around? What do you think when you give a child some toy and you see that they abuse it and neglect it and don't take care of it? How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel when you give a friend or a family member a particular gift and they abuse it? My grandfather worked for the same company in Bridgeport, Connecticut for almost 40 years. In 40 years, he drove back and forth from Brookfield to Bridgeport. Never late, never out sick. People in Bridgeport would call in and say, I can't get there because of the snow. But my grandfather was there from Brookfield, Connecticut, every morning. At the end of that time, they gave him a medallion. I don't know what it was made of, but the company he worked for, just to give you an idea, was hired by the Mint of the United States of America. They made the coins. Every morning they would go in and be searched. Every evening on the way out, they would be searched to make sure they weren't putting those coins or the materials to make those coins in their pockets. He was given this medallion, and he was very proud of it. And after he passed away, I remember going to visit my father, and my father was very proud of the fact that he took my grandfather's medallion and used it to level up a piece of furniture in his house. He thought I was supposed to be happy about that. He was actually bragging about it as if it was a wonderful thing. How would my grandfather have felt if he knew what he was doing with that medallion? Have you ever gone to a friend's house to help them paint or to clean up or to do some task that they needed help with? And when it was finished, it looked wonderful, it looked great. And then you went back a week later and you're like, what did we even do here? Well, does it hurt our feelings? How does it make us feel when we see the gifts that we give, that we worked hard for, to be abused or neglected? Do we tend to take it personally? Probably. How do you think God feels when the gifts He gives us are neglected? Do you think He takes it personally? Do you think it bothers Him to see the gifts He gives to us neglected or abused? This morning I'd like to look at actions number 7 and 8. Action 7. Be responsible for what God has given us. You know, God has entrusted His church with many things. As we started this session for church growth, we talked about the greatest thing that God entrusted us with. In Matthew, the 28th chapter, 19 and 20, He says, "Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, to observe all that I command you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Our primary mission in the church is to seek and save the lost. People notice what we say and what we do. People notice how we use what God has given to us. It's extremely important that in order to accomplish God's mission, that we use the things He has given us in a way that the world can look at how we're given those things and how we use what we've been given. Just like we look at that child or we look at that friend and the gift we've given. If we see that it's not being used very good, it doesn't make us very happy. Have you ever been driving down the road and you go into this nice neighborhood and you see all these nice houses with the lawns nice and meticulous, and you think, wow, those places look nice. And then you just go down a little bit further and you see another nice big house, junk cars in the yard, weeds growing up. Doesn't look very appealing. It doesn't look very nice. And you might think, no, they just don't have much money. They can't take care of it because they're poor. And years ago, I used to think that was true. But the longer I lived, the more I realized that that isn't necessarily true at all. What does it take to pick up trash in your front yard? Interesting to note, most salvage companies will pay for a junk vehicle. So you can actually get on the phone and call Dell's and say, hey, I have a car that needs to be picked up. Okay, well, what is it? What year is it? Okay, we'll give you $400 for that car. So if you have all these junk cars in your yard, it's actually a way to make money. So saying, I don't have money, isn't an excuse for abusing the gifts that God has given to you. Now, I say this simply to say this. God has given us some wonderful gifts. He's given us this beautiful building that we have. And He expects us to take care of it. You know, a couple of weeks ago, some of the men got together, and it was amazing. It looked like all these little ants on an anthill, and they all converged in one place, and things started to happen. The playground equipment that had been sitting so long, neglected, and overgrown, was taken and dismantled. The weeds were pulled down that were almost as tall as me. I have to ask you a question and be honest. When you pulled up here and you saw that area out there with no weeds 4 foot high, did it look better? Coming up here regularly, I see it all the time. And I think, wow, that looks so much better. You see, God gives us a responsibility. Going back to my grandfather again, he was a man that didn't have a lot, blue-collar worker, didn't make a lot of money, but he owned a home in Brookfield. He kept that house immaculate. The lawns were mowed regularly. The landscaping was immaculate. His garden, I remember him laying out the strings to plant the vegetables, so everything was in a perfect straight line. And you look at his garden, he had tomatoes here, squash here, cucumbers here. Everything was in a perfect little line. And it looked really nice. You see, he didn't have a lot of money, but he kept it immaculate. And it's easy for us to say, well, you know, the church, we don't have a lot of money. But think about it. What did it take to cut those weeds down? What does it take to clean the inside of the building that God has given to us? What does it take to pull the weeds out of the flower gardens that are overgrown? What does it take to keep things in the building neat and tidy and things that aren't being used stored away? It doesn't take money. It just takes people being responsible for what God has given them. In Luke, the 12th chapter, verse 48, Jesus says, "For everyone who has been given much, much will be required. To whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more." And then again in the 16th chapter, verse 10, he says, "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. And he who is unrighteous in a little thing is unrighteous in much." You know, God has given us many great and wonderful blessings. As I said, this church building is one of them. Before the church met here, it met at Park Avenue School in Danbury. Now, I wasn't there regularly, but I remember attending there. Before it met at Park Avenue School in Danbury, it met at a little white church building on Liberty Street called the Swedish Evangelical Emmanuel Church. At the time, there wasn't a whole lot of buildings by it. And there was a few of us at my age. I don't even remember how old I was. I just remember going up this staircase. It seemed like it was like from one of the horror movies. I was looking for cobwebs to get through. And my class was up in the attic. And the teacher, I believe his name, we called him Mr. Charles. I don't know, some of you that were there then, maybe. Am I right? Yeah. The church in Danbury has come a long way from that little building meeting in the attic. Can't help but think God has blessed us with this building. God has blessed us with what we have. We've come a long way. Think of the hard work that the people before us had to do to make this building a reality. James tells us in the first chapter, verse 17, every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. God made this building possible. God gave us this building. He entrusted his church with that building. Oh, we may have facilitated its being built, but don't be fooled. God built this building. It's because of him that we have this building. What do you think he thinks about this responsibility he has entrusted us with when we don't take care of what he has given to us? Do you think it hurts him? Think for a minute. When God decided it was time to build the tabernacle, he asked the people for free will offering. The people began to give, and they gave, and they gave. And finally Moses said to the people, you have to stop giving because there's way more than we can use. There's just too much. Have you ever heard of that happening before? Where people gave so much that they were being turned away. It's like going to one of the disaster areas where people are hungry and thirsty and everything's been wiped out. And you drive in with all these goods. No, we can't use it. We've got a stockpile. We don't need anything. So when God decided to have the tabernacle built, and when he built the temple, he made sure it was to be built of the best materials available. He got the best workers. In fact, he did something a little unusual. He sent his spirit to dwell in the head builder. He made it so that his building would be just what he wanted. Now I know that this building isn't God's temple. I know that God doesn't live in this building. But his church does. You see, we are his church. We use this building that he has given to us. What do we say to him about how we take care of it? Another question. What does it say to the people of the world when they pull in and see weeds growing around playground equipment 4 feet high? What does it say to the people of the world when they come in and they see cobwebs growing in the corners of the building inside? Or carpets that are stained and unclean? You see, our mission and say, look, we don't have any visitors anyway, so we don't have to worry about it. With that attitude, we never will either. Because when we started this series, one of the first things from the scriptures we saw, God gives the increase. And he gives us everything we need to make the church grow. It's up to each one of us to use those things that he has given us. It doesn't matter who we are, a janitor, a laborer, a tradesman, a CEO. God gives us all gifts, and he expects us to use them wisely and respectfully. Action number 8. You know, there's numerous verses in the Bible that tell us to use our time wisely. We don't think about that very much, but there's a lot of verses, quite a few really. Ecclesiastes has a whole chapter about time. But part of that reading from Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1, there's an appointed time for everything. There is a time for every event under heaven. In the 90th Psalm, which is said to be written by Moses, verse 12, Moses says, so teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Moses is saying, use the time that God has given us to make us better, to make us godly, by focusing on the things that God wants us to focus on. Think about it for a minute. Of all the things that God has given to us, name one that once it's passed, you can never get back again. That's time. Once it's passed, you never get to do it over again. Ben Franklin said, lost time is never found again. William Penn said, time is what we want most, but what we use the worst. A Greek philosopher from 323 BC, Theophrastus, said time is the most valuable thing a man can spend. Arthur Carlson said, once wasted, you can never get it back. And it's absolutely true. Time we can never get back. Paul in Ephesians, the 5th chapter, verse 15 and 16 says, therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because these days are evil. Just one of the few scriptures that talks about the use of time and our responsibility to use time correctly. You know, we do pretty good at starting worship service on time. I've been to a lot of churches where you walk in and say the time is 11 o'clock, the time is 9:30. At 11:10, people are still looking at each other, wondering who's leading the singing, wondering when the service is starting. I'm a visitor, but other visitors are saying to me, is it supposed to start at 11? Well, yeah. What do you think their impression is of how that church is using the time that God has given to them? You know, we all go through it. We have family members that if you tell them 1 o'clock, they show up at 3 o'clock. So then we think we get smart. So we'll tell them 1 o'clock, but we'll actually start at 3. They show up at 4. It's almost like they have this little way of knowing that you're not really going to start without them. And they don't really care. But what does it say when you have a meeting with somebody and everybody agrees, okay, we're going to meet at 1 o'clock. You're there ready to go. Most of the other people are there ready to go. And you're still waiting for that one person. And maybe that going to lead the meeting. Or maybe that one person is the one that bringing lunch. That's really bad. How does it make you feel? You know, I told somebody years ago, psychologists actually studied this. And they actually looked at the lives of people that are habitually late. And I told one of our family members why they were late. They weren't very happy with me. So I'm going to say it again. It's okay if you're not happy with it. Psychologists say one of the reasons people are late is because of arrogance. You see, their time is more important than your time. And they don't care. Now, I'm not saying that's the case, Dave. Don't take me wrong. I don't say that's the case every time. But let me ask you this. As a church, how does it make you feel? Let me put it in a different perspective. You have a 10 o'clock Monday morning doctor appointment. Today, all the doctors want you to be there 15 minutes early, right? I mean, when we were in South Carolina, we would get a text at 9:45 saying you have a 10 o'clock meeting, you're late. Where are you? So, you get there, you're 15 minutes ahead of time, you wait till your 10 o'clock appointment, and you sit and you wait. And you wait. And you wait. An hour later, your doctor comes in all smiley. Oh, hi, how you doing? Good to see you. I wonder what that doctor would say is, I'm suffering anxiety because you kept me waiting so long. But how do you feel when that happens? Are you happy? Are you bothered? Are you upset? Mike, what does this have to do with the church growing? And I know Troy back there is thinking, Mike, what does this have to do with church growing? Troy, I'm glad you asked me. What do they say about first impressions? You don't usually get a chance to do a second impression if the first one isn't very good. What message do we give to those that are coming here to visit for the first time? And we're not responsible enough to start on time. We've been doing pretty good in the worship. The Bible class, we need some help. What message does that give when you're supposed to start at 11 and we don't start till 11:15? You're stealing my 15 minutes. Some of you might not look at it that way. Some of you might look at it, well, that's 15 minutes less, but you don't have to work, right? No, you don't understand. You messed up my whole week. Because I plan on getting so far. And I don't get that far. No, I'm just kidding about that. It doesn't mess me up. But you see what I'm saying. The problem is we start at 11 o'clock. And then those that come late at 11:15 come in talking, having a good old time. Well, we're in the middle of a prayer. Well, we're talking in the middle of the class. Because maybe they think everybody's late, or maybe they think we should wait for them. I don't know. It doesn't matter what you and I think. It matters what does a visitor think. And again, you might say, we don't have any visitors, so we don't have to worry about it. Again, with that attitude, we won't have any visitors. You know, there's all kinds of places to look at for information today. So I asked myself, what would bosses think? So I looked up at what recruiters had to say about people that came in late for interviews. And you'd be shocked at how many come in late for interviews. But this is what one recruitment company said. Being late for an interview can create a negative impression that is hard to overcome. And they made the interviewer question your commitment, reliability, and overall suitability for the job. What does that first-time visitor think? When we're late. First impressions are extremely important. And we only get one chance to make a first impression. Are we hindering the mission that God has given to us by not making a good impression? We need to be aware of the thoughts and opinions of those in the world that we are affecting, that we are shaping by our actions and what we do, and how the responsibility that God has given us is cared for. People see it. People making a comment about it. Some of you may remember a man called Terry Smith. Terry Smith was like a counselor, therapist, if you would, at the College Church of Christ in Searcy, Arkansas. He came up here one year for a youth rally, and then he moved to work with a church just outside of Boston. I remember when I lived in Maine having the opportunity to get to visit and speak with Terry. And that was back in the early 80s. And I remember one of the things that Terry said to me that to this day I have not forgotten, and I try to remember. Terry said to me, we are not only responsible for what we say, but for what people think we say. And you know, for somebody in the world, that may not be a big deal. But for God's people, that is a big deal. What message are we giving to them? What are we telling them by the actions we take? Romans, Paul says in 14:12, so that each one of us will give an account of himself to God. So God is asking us, what are you doing with what I've given to you? How do you use the gifts that I've given you? Each one of us needs to ask ourselves, are we neglecting what God has given to us? Are we neglecting to do our part? Because making things run smoothly, Paul in 1 Corinthians, the 14th chapter, says all things are to be done neatly in order. That's how he wants our worship. To be done in an orderly fashion, without chaos. It's our responsibility. It's not somebody down the road's responsibility to how they're looking at us. It's our responsibility as the message that we are sending to them. But it's also a message we send to each other. When we're late for those Bible classes, oh, we're here in the building, we're just having coffee. We'll get to the Bible class when we get to it. What message does it give for those that are sitting there waiting? What message does it give to whomever is teaching? Doesn't matter if it's me or Jim or Andy or Michael or whoever. What message are we giving to them? And And you might say, Mike, you know that preacher we have is long-winded. He's the one that's the fault. Really? I've never been blamed for making people late because I preach. It probably has happened, but nobody's ever said it. So this morning I ask you, where are you in your responsibility to God? It's an individual thing. You can't say, oh, it's the church's fault, because you are the church. You are part of that church. Have you said anything about it? Have you done anything about it? Each one of us is responsible. This morning I ask, where are you in your relationship with God? Are you fulfilling the responsibility that He has given to you? If you've never been a Christian, you have that opportunity this morning as well to make your life right with God. To make things right with the one who judges all things. Where are you in your relationship with God? You have opportunity as we stand and sing to come forward and make things